Only last week.
Yeah. Last week we missed because it was an off day, so it was handling. And today's also an off day, but I said we're not going to do 2 weeks in a row. I was able to work out, so everybody's accounted for. So thank you for joining us on this President's Day. But we're going to be studying now together chapter 9. We're in Perek Tet of the Book of Judges of Shofetim. So just to refresh our memory, because it's been a little bit of time, we just finished the stories of Gideon, who was a really great leader for the Jewish people, brought them 40 years of peace in defeating some of their enemies, specifically Midian, in remarkable fashion. We noted that largely Gideon is viewed as a positive role model, a great leader. He did have some issues as far as signs, and at the end of his life, it seems as though he goes wrong with this ephod, and things sort of take a tailspin after he dies. So just to refresh where we're at, it's worthy to read the last few verses of chapter 8 of Perek Chet, starting from verse 30. Verse 30. ולגדעון היו 70 בנים יוצאי יריחו כי נשים רבות היו לו. Gideon had 70 children because he had many wives. Upilagsho asher b'Shechem, one of his concubines from the city of Shechem, Yalda lo gamhi ben, gave birth to a son for him. Vayasem et shemo Abimelech, and he made his name Abimelech. So that's key to go back because chapter 9 is going to center largely around Abimelech. He's going to be the one we're focused on. And so it's worth noting where he's at. Okay, so Abimelech is one of the children of Gideon's concubines. Okay. Vayamot Gideon ben Yoash besevat tova. Gideon himself dies at a ripe old age, which usually means besevat tova means without conflict. There's no issues or feuding in the family. For example, Avraham is noted to die besevat tova. His two sons, Yitzchak and Ishmael, bury him. Yitzchak dies also besevat tova. Yaakov and Esav have made peace with each other, at least for that time being, and they bury together. So to pass away besevat tova not only means to be at an old age, but to also have one's family intact. At least at this moment, Gideon's family is somewhat still intact. However, after he dies is when things sort of go out of control. I don't know. I think we have another. So it's after Gideon dies that things start to spin out of control. Vayika asher met Gideon, when Gideon passes away. Vayashuvu bnei Israel vayiznu acharei ha'be'alim. The Jewish people go back and they again stray after the idolatry. Vayasimu lahem Baal Berit Elohim, and they adopted Baal Berit as their god. Velo zachru bnei Israel et Hashem Elohim. They don't remember God, the Lord their God. Hamatzil otam miyad kol oivehem misaviv, who saved them from all of their enemies surrounding. Velo asu chesed im bet Yeruba'al Gideon. And what's worse is they don't even do a kindness with Gideon. In other words, what have you done for me lately? Gideon ushers in 40 years of peace from Midian, and they can't even remember that. They can't even at least do kindness with his family. Kechol hatova asher asa im Yisrael, in return for all the good that he did to the Jewish people. So there's a rotten character trait that Am Yisrael have at this time, which is that they lack appreciation and gratitude for the people who have ushered in times of peace and tranquility for them. They very quickly forget, and all goes back to what it was before. So knowing that this is the climate, we now enter into chapter 9, and chapter 9 is going to center around one of Gideon's children, the one who was mentioned at the end of chapter 8, Abimelech. And while all of the major characters in our book have typically been good characters, people who usher in peace and good prosperity for the Jewish people, salvation from their enemies, despite whatever small things that go on with them, for the most part, they're overwhelmingly good characters. Abimelech, as we'll see very early on, is nowhere near that. He's the complete opposite. He's almost a foil to all of those great judges who we've met before. So we're going to read through a lot of the Pesukim. Chapter 9 is quite lengthy. It's 57 verses. We'll zero in on certain parts more than others, but the story itself is quite a fascinating story. So what happens now is we have 70 children to Gideon, and Gideon was really the pronounced leader of the Jewish people, to the extent that the Jewish people asked him to be their king. And remember, he denied, he refused to accept that responsibility because he said, God will rule over you. It's not ironic that his child's name is Abimelech. What does Abimelech mean? My father is the king, right? In other words, despite the fact that Gideon did not want to accept the kingship, Abimelech views his father as the king, and as a result will also view himself as a rightful heir to the fictitious throne that he believes his father should have had. So let's see how that plays a role in Abimelech's behavior. Verse number 1, Vayelech Abimelech ben Yerubbaal Shechema. Abimelech, the son of Yerubbaal, that's the nickname of Gideon, goes to Shechem el ahe imo, to his mother's brothers. Now this is important because Abimelech's mother is a concubine from Shechem, which means that her family resides in Shechem. That's their home base. But we don't necessarily even know if Abimelech's mother was Jewish, right? Was this concubine that Gideon took Jewish? Maybe yes, maybe no. In Shechem at the time, you definitely have Jews living there. That's where Yehoshua did his final speech to the Jewish people. But we also don't find anywhere that Yehoshua conquered the city of Shechem. And we know that the Chivi, one of the tribes of the Canaanim, used to live in Shechem as well. It's possible that they were still living there and actually made peace with the Jewish people in that spot. And so it's very possible that Gideon married a member of the Canaanite nations and had a child of Abimelech. And Abimelech is now going to appeal to his mother's brothers who are not even Jewish, technically. It's possible. Or they're living in harmony, at least with the Jews. But in the end of the day, Abimelech goes to Shechem. Vaydaber alehem, he speaks to his family members. Ve'el kol mishpachat bet avi imo lemor, and says the following to his mother's family. Daberuna be'ozne kol ba'ale Shechem, speak into the ears of all the members of Shechem. Ma tov lachem, what's better for you? Hamshol bachem shiv'im ish, that 70 different people should rule over you. Kol b'nei Yerubbaal, all of the children of Gideon. Im meshol bachem ish echad, or is it better if you have one leader? 70 leaders is chaos. You'll never be able to get anything done. You need to have one person. You need to have a clear-cut monarch and dictator. And so you should know, I am your flesh and blood, and I'm the child of Gideon. So it makes sense that you should crown me and follow me to be your one and only king. His mother's brothers said all this on behalf of Abimelech to all the citizens of Shechem, and Abimelech starts to gain popularity in this region. Their hearts turned towards Abimelech, because they felt it would be very beneficial to them to have their brethren, their kinsmen, to be the leader of the Jewish people. And why not? You want someone from your background to lead Bnei Israel. They handed him over 70 pieces of silver from the temple of Baal Berit. This is the idolatry that the Jewish people were serving at the time. So they hand over 70 pieces of silver. Abimelech uses this to hire out worthless and reckless people, really people who are empty of any morals and ethics. And these men follow Abimelech. So Abimelech garners the support of the people of Shechem. They pay him 70 pieces of silver, and he basically hires, all using these 70 pieces of silver, hitmen, people who have no morals, no ethics, and are not afraid to get down and dirty. And these people follow Abimelech. And what do? They do something quite unthinkable. Vayavo bet aviv Ofrata. Abimelech leads them to the house of his father Gideon in Ofrat. Vayaharog et ehav bnei Yerubbaal shiv'im ish al even ehat. And he murders all 70 of his stepbrothers. Anybody who's a threat to Abimelech, basically, of taking over his throne, because Abimelech knows that it's the lineage of Gideon who has the most popularity and is likely to take over as the king. It was, after all, Gideon who was offered the first person to be the king of the Jewish people. And so he says, look, all these people pose a threat to me. All right, so this is like the first time that this happens. We know that this is very popular in ancient culture, that anytime somebody gets into power as a king, the first thing they do is they kill off everybody in their family who could possibly threaten his status as the king. Is he the oldest? We don't know. It's actually very likely that he's not the oldest. How would I know that he's not the oldest? Think back to last chapter, to chapter 8, when Gideon was ready to kill the two officers, Zevach and Salmunah. And he told one of his sons to come take the sword and to do it on his behalf. At that time, it says that his son was a Na'ad, was very young. And that son, I think it was actually the Bechor, if I'm not mistaken. It's worth just double checking now that you asked the question. Where is it? It's before the story of him wanting to be crowned king. It's when he's killing Zevach and Salmunah. It's in the middle of chapter 8 over here. They run away. He captures them. Where is it? Okay, he tells them, here, verse 20. So it's Yeter, it's not Abimelech. Abimelech is not the oldest. It's explicit that he's not the oldest, right? I didn't even realize that it said Bechoro there, but it's explicit that he's not the oldest. And at that time, Yeter is very young. So the oldest of Gideon is actually very, very young at the time that he's doing it. So well, it's probably, it's happening at the end of the 40 years of tranquility, because Gideon has died and that piece is gone, right? At the time, Yeter. Yeah, Yeter is probably in his 50s. The question is, it's very possible Abimelech wasn't even born at the time that Gideon had all those conquests, right? It's very possible he wasn't born. He probably not. That could be a good thing and a bad thing. In other words, actually, I want to say it's a bad thing. Had he been born at the time and what witnessed his father, maybe he would have been better. In other words, Abimelech grows up on the legends of his father, on the stories of his father, but never actually witnessed his father in doing that battle. So it could be that Abimelech, has these visions of grandeur that his father should have been king, and that if his father should have been king, he should be king also. But Abimelech is not the oldest, but yet he somehow is the strongest. It's not always the Bechor that's the strongest. And together with his support system of maniacal individuals, he's able to completely destroy out his entire family and get rid of anybody who would serve as a threat. However, he's not fully successful, the text tells us. Vayivater Yotam ben Yeruba'al hakaton ki nihba. One individual, one of the 70 children of Gideon, his name is Yotam, is the youngest. He's hakaton. He's very, very young at the time. He happens to be left alive, ki nihba, because he hid. And that's important. It tells us he hid. In other words, had Abimelech discovered him, he would have had mercy on him just because he was young. He would have killed him too. It was only because Yotam hid that he was able to escape from the clutches of Abimelech. Yotam, by the way, is another name here that's very interesting, because if you scramble the letters, Yotam is also Yatom. Yatom means an orphan, right? Which is, a very appropriate name for this young boy who is basically orphaned from his entire family at a very young age because Abimelech has destroyed them all, right? So that's an interesting point. Exactly. It does say the text is very, very interesting in that way. If you go back to chapter 8, it says that Abimelech vayasim et shemo Abimelech. Usually when someone else gives you the name, it would say vayikra et shemo. He called his name Abimelech, which means the mother or the father gave him that name. Here it's possible that Abimelech wasn't even his real name from birth. It could be that Abimelech gave himself that name at some point when he decided, my father's king and I'm going to be king. He gave himself that name Abimelech, right? And that sort of encompasses his personality as opposed to Yotam, who's the Yatom, who's the helpless orphan who happens to escape. So as we've said many, many times in the course of our studies, names are pretty significant, and their characters and their situations are often embedded into their names. So that's the introduction. And if this is just the beginning of what Abimelech has to offer, it's only going to get worse from here. But we clearly see that Abimelech is not a man of moral standing and good character. He's definitely not continuing the legacy of his father as much as he thinks he is. Moving forward in the chapter now, Yotam is hidden away, and now Abimelech continues to gain more and more support from the people of Shechem. In verse 6, all the citizens of Shechem and all Bet Milo convened, and they proclaimed Abimelech king at the terebinth at the pillar of Shechem. Right? So they name him to be their king. When Yotam was informed, so when Yotam finds out, this is perhaps a little bit later, that Abimelech indeed has taken control because they've crowned him to be the king, he goes and he stands at the top of Har Gerizim. Har Gerizim is pretty significant because Har Gerizim was the mountain that when the Jewish people crossed into Eretz Yisrael, they did the famous ceremony of the berachot and the kelalot, the blessings and the curses at the end of Yehoshua's life. And the berachot, the blessings, were given on Har Gerizim, and the kelalah, the curses, were given at Har Eval. So Yotam goes back to the top of the mountain in which the blessings were given, hoping that this will elicit some kind of emotional response from the people. And he begins to offer criticism to the people and telling them what it is they've done, what the choice they've made in accepting Abimelech to be their king. He lifts his voice and he calls out to them. He says to them, hear me, the citizens of Shechem, and let God listen. Right? He gives perhaps one of the most famous parables, the famous mashal in the entire Tanakh. He gives the following mashal of trees searching for a king. One time the trees came and they were searching for a king for them. They went to the olive tree and they said, rule over us. After all, the olive tree produces oil. It's a very important trait. The olive tree responded to them, have I stopped giving off my produce? In other words, am I not able to give any more oil that you should honor me to be your king? In other words, now I'm going to stop. You're putting me as king. I'm not going to be able to produce anything else. And now I'm going to go to wave above the trees. So the trees went to the fig tree. Why don't you come and rule over us? And they say that the fig tree answers the same thing. Have I stopped giving my honey, my delicious fruits? And now I should go and wave over the trees. So they go to the vine, to the grapevine. They say to the grapevine, you come and reign over us. And the grapevine says the same thing. Have I stopped giving over my wine, which brings joy and festivity to God and to man? And now I'm going to go and rule over the trees. So obviously, what do we see? What's the pattern happening over here in this mashal? They keep going to all of these trees that are very productive, that produce and help out the society. And for each of them, the tree says, look, to me to be the king is going to make me stop being able to produce good things for the rest of the people. So let me just do my thing and choose someone else to be the king. Right? So where do they go finally? In verse 14, so all of the trees went to the lowly thorn bush. Lech ata meloch aleinu. And they said, you come and rule over us and be our king. So the bush says to the other trees, if you truly believe that you want me to be the king over you, and in good faith you're placing me in that position, come and take shelter in my shade. Now really a thorn bush doesn't really have much shade. It's not exactly a very big tree. But if not, let fire come out from the thorns, and let them consume and eat up the cedar trees of Lebanon. So this is the mashal, right? It's a little cryptic in nature. Let's see what he says after that. He says, so if this is the case, this was the mashal that he gave, the parable. Says Yotam, ve'ata, and now that I've given you this mashal, hear me. Im be'emetu betamim asitem. if in truth and in good faith and in wholeheartedness you have performed, v'tamlichu with Abimelech, and you made Abimelech your king, and if you've done good together with Gidon and with his house, and if you repaid the goodness that he has done for you. This is like a sarcastic language on the part of Yotam, right? Obviously, they haven't done this. In good faith, they have not chosen Abimelech to be their king and done good kindness with Gidon and his family, and they haven't made a good decision, basically, is what Yotam is telling them, right? But, right, and what did he do? Considering that my father fought for you, and he cast his soul up against you to save you, and he saved you from the hands of the Midianites. And what have you done? Verse 18, and you have risen up against the house of my father, and you slaughtered 70 of his children on one stone. And you crowned as king Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, right? Notice the derogatory language, exactly, right, that he's using over here, right? He's calling the concubine of Gidon, like this is the son of the maidservant. He's not worthy to rule. Why do you think he has these terrible characteristics? And you put him to be your king, al ba'alei Shechem, on the citizens of Shechem, ki achichemu, simply because he's your brother. But this is what you do. This is how you repay Gidon. And if this is really true and in good faith you've done with Gidon and with his home today, simhu ba'Abimelech. So then rejoice with Abimelech, and he'll rejoice with you. But if it's not really the case, which it isn't, tetze esh me Abimelech. Fire will come out from Abimelech v'tochal et ba'alei Shechem ve'et bet bilo. In other words, Yotam is warning the people of Shechem. Just know what type of person you have put to be your leader. This is a person who can kill off 70 of his own brothers from his own father's house, despite all the good things that his father did for him and all things that he did for Am Yisrael. That's the type of person you have. So if you really believe that this is the guy, go ahead, have fun and enjoy and be together with Abimelech. But if not, which we know it's not, just know fire will come out from Abimelech. There's going to be tension. There's going to be feuding. This is not going to end up in a proper way. Fire is going to come out from Abimelech to consume you, and fire is going to come from you to consume him. In other words, it's going to lead to warfare, to bloodshed, to tension, to feuding. All of that is what's going to happen, is what Yotam is predicting. Now Yotam knows he stood at the top of the mountain for a reason, because he knows he's a fugitive. He knows that they want to kill him, especially after he gives them this premonition and this mashal of the terrible things that they have done in crowning Abimelech as their king. He certainly knows he's going to be a man on the run. So that's why he does it from the top of a mountain. He gives them the critique, and then he runs away. And he dwells there because of Abimelech, his brother, whom he knows will certainly chase him to try and go ahead and kill him. So where do we stand at this point, right? We stand with Abimelech, the wicked person, killing off his family, being put on a pedestal by the people of Shechem, who are his relatives because of his mother, and Yotam, the one who got away, revealing what he has done, offering criticism to the people of Shechem, and a premonition that things are not going to go well. Yeah. Sounds like the type of thing that Hashem would have told him to say. Because a lot of times they come with a mashal and then they give the explanation and right. Be predicting something. Right. But it doesn't say that. So it's like, right. Liz is saying it sounds a lot like a prophecy in many ways, right? The prophets often will give parables, like, for example, Natan and David, for example. When Natan comes to rebuke David for taking Bathsheba, he gives him a parable. He says, if a man bought a sheep and he took the sheep from someone else, what would you say? No, I would say kill him. Oh, well, that's what you did, right? So, in other words, prophets will often use, all kinds of examples and parables to explain what's going on over here and to offer criticism and rebuke. Certainly what Yotam is doing over here. It could be that there's an element of prophecy here, but it's unlikely, given the fact that Yotam doesn't have we don't know anything about him that would stand out to offer it. But To be honest, it also doesn't take a genius to figure out that this is what's going to happen when you consider the type of person that Abimelech is and how he rules and the way he behaves towards other people. Somebody who can wipe out his entire family for threatening him, for even posing a potential threat to his kingdom right away, is not somebody who's going to allow people to rule democratically or anything like that. He's somebody who will eventually, it's going to end up in a bad way. Just to go back a little bit though to the mashal, what's the power of the mashal, of the tree mashal that Yotam offers over here? I was curious as I was learning it because it's such a famous mashal that people quote and they know the mashal of Yotam. What exactly is the takeaway of that mashal, right? He writes over here, this is Rabbi Hatton, he says, while the other trees that were asked to become king are all productive members of the landscape, yielding delectable fruit and useful byproducts, the bramble yields but thorns. It is a source of neither shade nor produce. Interesting, he says, come under my shade, right? Which there really is no shade. If anything, the bramble constitutes a threat to its surroundings, for not only do its sharp thorns harm any who venture too close, but its dried leaves can spread destruction far and wide when they are ignited. In other words, what does the thorn bush offer as far as productivity? Not only doesn't it offer anything as far as productivity, it probably contributes more to destruction. Its leaves that get dried out are incredibly flammable, which could spread fire. That's what we saw, tetzeh esh from the atad, that the fire is going to come out from the atad, from the thorn bush. And when the thorn bush says to his people, oh, if you really want me to be king, come close and go under my shade. Nobody wants to go close to a thorn bush. Thorn bush doesn't really provide much shade in the first place. And anybody who goes close to it is going to get pricked by it and certainly not going to be in a comfortable position. He says, so too Abimelech, explains Yotam. Yotam is, in this parable, is painting Abimelech as the thorn bush, right? In other words, he's saying there were so many other better choices that could be your king that are productive things. And by the way, all of those productive things, like my father, when they were asked to be king, what did they do? They said, no, we don't need to, but we have other ways that we could be productive, right? I'm not worthy to be the king. I'm better off continuing the productivity that I could provide to the society. This is a perfect mashal. In other words, Yotam is hinting, what happened when you all asked my father, Gidon, to be the king? He said, no, I'm not worthy to rule over you. Hashem will rule over you. I have other ways that I can be productive to the society, like the olive tree, like the grape tree, like everything else. He says, what happens when you ask the thorn bush to be the king? The thorn bush doesn't do anything else, right? It just sits there. And once you ask the thorn bush to be king, what does it do? It jumps on that opportunity. You mean I'm going to get some level of importance even though I do nothing, even though I can only cause harm to other people? You want me to be the king? Sure, I'll be the king. What's going to happen? All that's going to bring is destruction to everyone else, right? But that's why the thorn bush jumps at the opportunity to be the king, because he's so inferior and he has so little to contribute that when he gets that opportunity, he jumps right on it. There's no humility there from the thorn bush. He says, that says Yotam, that's Abimelech. Though he lacks any constructive and useful qualifications to become a good king and leader, he has seized the vacant position by force. Although he promises to protect those who have been persuaded to appoint him, in the end, he will destroy them and himself with his self-centered recklessness. And in fact, as Liz pointed out, these words are certainly prophetic in nature, because that's exactly what is going to happen throughout the rest of the chapter. So I think the lesson and what comes out of the parable for us to maybe take away is, when people have their role, when people are content with what they do, when they understand what they could produce for society and things are good, they don't feel the need to forcibly take over leadership positions over others. Maybe if they're offered it and they think that there's something better they could do as far as productivity, they might, but they're not jumping at those opportunities. The olive tree, the grapevine, the fig tree, they understand their worth. They understand their productivity. They understand what they provide. And therefore, they're not jumping. They're humble. They're not jumping at the chance to rule by force. What happens is that when you have a thorn bush that's so unproductive, those are the ones that usually jump at those opportunities, and it only leads to death and destruction. And that's what happens here with Abimelech. So I guess the takeaway lesson is to be careful who we appoint to be our leaders, to make sure that our leaders are people of high quality and moral standing, to make sure that they're already being productive members of society. They have something to offer there besides just brute force, because usually once that happens, it's going to lead to a situation where the people who chose them in the first place are not very happy with their decision and the choice that they have made. Any questions or comments or things to add on that front? Okay, very good. So let's see what happens with Abimelech now as we move forward in the chapter. We're on Pasuk 22 over here. As predicted, in just 3 years, the relationship between Abimelech and his people goes sour. Vayasar Abimelech al Yisrael shalosh shanim. Abimelech holds sway. He is an officer over the Jewish people for 3 years. Vayishlach Elohim ruach ra'ah ben Abimelech uben ba'alei Shechem. God sends an evil spirit, a rift, a tension between Abimelech and the people of Shechem who put him in that position in the first place. Vayivgedu ba'alei Shechem ba'Avimelech, and the members of Shechem rebel against Abimelech. What do? Lavo Hamas Shiv'im b'nei Yeruba'al, because at some point they recognized the terrible act that their own king Abimelech did in committing a crime against the 70 children of Gid'on. ודמם לשום על אבימלך אחיהם אשר הרג אותם ועל בעלי שכם אשר חזקו את ידיו להרוג את אחיו. And the blood recoil upon their brother Abimelech who had slain them, and upon the citizens of Shechem who have abetted in him in the slaying of his brothers. In other words, at some point, things clicked in, right? God sends this ruach ra'ah to separate between the people of Shechem and Abimelech because they come to their senses, they come to their right mind and understand the evil, wicked person which they have put as their leader after destroying 70 people, 70 of his own children, the blood of his children on top of Gid'on. It's a terrible thing. And in verse 25, they start to fight back. To start up the rebellion, the citizens of Shechem set up ambushes on the roads, ambushing any people who claim allegiance to Abimelech and his men. They steal and kidnap and take things from anybody who passes through the way. And Abimelech is now told about what is happening. And so now there's a coup, there's a rebellion against Abimelech, and Abimelech has to figure out how they're going to squash it. Verse 26, who leads the rebellion? A man by the name of Gaal ben Evid. This man, Gaal, the son of Evid, and his brothers passed through Shechem, and all of a sudden, the people of Shechem find their confidence in him. They go out to the fields, they gather things, they have a great harvest, and they make a festival. They come to the temple of their God. They eat and they drink and they curse Abimelech. I find this pasuk to be pretty fascinating. Why do I find it to be fascinating? Because while the reader is saying, yes, this is a good thing that somebody is overriding Abimelech, certainly Abimelech is the villain in this story, Gaal ben Evid and his people are not exactly the heroes either, right? So in one sense, they might be because they're opposing Abimelech and his wicked people, but at the same time, Gaal ben Evid is not exactly a man of God, right? When he takes the people into the field and they take their things, vayasu hilunim, they make a festival to Bet Elohim, to the temple of their gods. In other words, they're also idol worshippers, right? So you're just replacing one group of wicked people for another group of wicked people. So yeah, we don't like Abimelech and what he did to the house of Gid'on and the type of person that he could be in terms of bloodshed. But Gaal ben Evid doesn't exactly seem at first glance to be the greatest hero of people that will take over as a result. It's really more of a tragedy that we just have bad people fighting against bad people, right? Yeah. Right. A lot of this, by the way, has to do with Jews getting caught in the crossfire. Like we said, Gid'on is somebody who, Abimelech might even not be Jewish himself, depending on what his mother's status might have been. He's from a Pilegish, and then we have Gaal ben Evid, and so Shechem is under siege and under warfare, and most of the people involved in this might not even be members of Am Yisrael, although we know members of Am Yisrael do live there and might be caught in between. It is true that Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years, right? So the Jews are involved. Yeah. Vayomer Gaal ben Eved, mi Avimelech o mi Shechem ki na'avdenu. Gaal ben Eved says, who's Avimelech and who are these people of Shechem that we should serve them? Halo ben Yeruba'al uzvul pekido. Oh, he's just the son of Gidon, and Zevul is his military officer, his lieutenant. Ivdu et anshe Hamor avi Shechem. They themselves served Hamor, the father of Shechem. Umadua na'avdenu anachnu. Why should we serve him? I wonder what this means, Hamor Avi Shechem over here. Hamor Avi Shechem is a reference all the way back to the time of Yaakov. I think Rashi has a comment over here. Yeah. Right, it says, Rashi says, Imbatem leknot lachem adonim, if you're coming to acquire for yourselves masters, Bo'u ve'ivdu et anshe Hamor. Come and serve the men of Hamor, Shehaya Nesi Haaretz Mikedem, who was the prince of the land from beforehand. In other words, why are we serving this guy Abimelech? Right? What is so special about him? Why should we pay any attention to him at all? Right? Where am I over here? I'm in Judges 7. How did I get there? I don't understand what's going on with this the Safari sometimes. Where are we at? Pasuk, right, 29. Yeah. Before that. We should, the way they interpret over here, it says the same son of Yeruba'al and his lieutenant Zevul once served the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. So why should we serve him? In other words, if they served Hamor, the son of Shechem, that means Hamor, the son of Shechem, is the most important guy. Let's continue to serve them. Why should we serve Avimelech? Rashi has a little bit of a different way of looking at it technically. He says that Hamor, the son of Shechem, was the true ruler over this area. So let's just go with him and not anybody else, right? In essence, whatever way you want to shake it out, it basically says that they're undermining Avimelech's authority. They're saying, why should we follow Avimelech? What greatness has he provided for the people of Shechem? He's provided nothing for us. So why should we be so smitten by him? Let's rule over the other people before him. And it's possible, like Liz said from Rashi, that Gaal ben Eved belongs to that other lineage, the lineage of the people of the Canaanites who lived from beforehand, from Hamor, the father of Shechem. So as a result, they're starting to gather popularity against Avimelech. In verse 29, if only this nation would be under my command, and I will remove Avimelech from being the king. And he tells Avimelech, he challenges him, fill up your ranks and come out and fight. So there's a challenge here. We have a coup, and now there's a war, an impending war. Verse 30, and Zevul, who is the lieutenant of Avimelech, hears about what he's spreading over here, and he gets very, very angry. He sends messengers to Avimelech, who's in a different place, Torma, saying, Gaal, the son of Eved, and his companions are coming to Shechem, and they are inciting the city against you. There's a rebellion, there's an uprising going on. So he gives him advice. He tells him, and this is a lot of what's been going on, this idea of ambushes. Verse 32, Zevul tells Avimelech, go in at night and set up an ambush in the fields. And in the morning when the sun comes up, Tashkim, you'll get up, and you'll be able to advance on the city. You'll basically meet the soldiers of Gaal ben Eved as they're encroaching upon the city. Before they're ready, you'll catch them by surprise, and you'll be able to do whatever you like with them. So the ambush was set up inside of Shechem by Gaal ben Eved's people to rebel against Avimelech, right? So that was happening on the plate. That was like when people start to get upset at the leadership, they start doing things like not informal battle, but they start doing like informal problems. So these little like gangs, so to speak, who were against Abimelech started setting up these little ambushes on the road. And anytime the government would be doing something or people would be going, they'd ambush them. And this was causing a lot of problems economically inside, and they would always ambush the people of Abimelech. And so that was what was happening in Shechem, which signaled that there's a rebellion. Then a formal rebellion came together under the leadership of Gaal ben Evid to go against Abimelech. Abimelech's lieutenant tells him, okay, we got to fight back. He's coming to encroach on the city to have a war. We're not going to fight face to face. We will eventually, but to make this easier for us, we know he's coming into the city. Let's set up night ambushes so that when the sun comes up and he thinks he's coming to the city, he's going to get us face to face. All of a sudden, we're going to attack him from the sides in an ambush before he's even ready. And that surprise attack will catch him off guard and we'll be able to do what we want. And this works. In verse 34, Vayakom Avimelech v'chol ha'am asher imol layla. Avimelech and all his people get up at night. Vayervu al Shechem arba'a rashim. And they hide out around the city of Shechem in 4 different hiding places, right? So remember, Avimelech and his people mostly are not in Shechem. The people of Shechem had an uprising from within the city, right? The people of Avimelech are really, he has people on the ground in Shechem, but most of his followers are not in the city of Shechem. So now they come and they create an ambush on the city of Shechem. Vayetze Gaal ben Evid, and Gaal ben Evid comes out. Vayamod petach shahar ha'ir, and he stands at the entrance of the city gate. Vayakom Avimelech v'ha'am asher ito min ha'ma'arav, and Avimelech and the people with him get up from the concealment of the ambush. Vayar Gaal et ha'am, but Gaal sees them, so they blow their cover. Right? In other words, this would have worked had they held out a little bit longer, or they would have been maybe a little bit more stealth-like. Gaal, apparently a good tactical man, he sees the people, and he knows that there's an ambush waiting, so he uncovers it. Vayomer el Zevul, he says to Zevul, Hine am yored merashe heharim. I see a nation coming down, people coming down from the mountains. Vayomer elav Zevul. Zevul tries to trick him and says, nah, you're just seeing it sel heharim ataro'e ka'anashim. You're seeing the shadow of the mountains as if it's people. He's trying to trick him and pretend like it's not. Vayosef od Gaal edaber. Gaal is not fooled. Vayomer hine am yordim me'im tabur haaretz. I see people coming from the tabur haaretz. Tabur is like the center of the land. In other words, I'm not fooled over here. I see what's happening. Verosh ehad ba miderech elon me'onenim. And another column is coming from another direction. I obviously see what's happening here, he tells Zevul. And so Zevul can't hide it anymore. So what does he say? He says, well, you're a macho man. You're a tough guy. Vayomer elav Zevul, ayeh efo picha asher tomar. What happened to your macho man, tactics that you've been saying, right? What happened to what you said? Mi Avimelech kina avdenu. Oh, who's Avimelech that we should serve him? Remember all that propaganda you were spreading in the uprising? Who's Avimelech that we should follow him? Okay, so now put your sword where your mouth is, right? Basically is what he's saying, right? So you spotted the ambush, big deal. So now fight us. Okay, so let's go. Let's see what's going to happen. This is the people who you despised. Come out and fight against us. So, there was an attempt over here where it seems like to have a sneak attack, a surprise ambush coming out from the sides. Gaal uncovers it. Zevul tries to hide it, but it's not hideable. And eventually, Zevul just basically says to him, remember you were speaking so macho against us? So let's go. Now's the time for a battle. Let's go one-on-one. What happens in the battle? Gaal comes out to the city with the citizens of Shechem, and he fights against Abimelech. But he has to flee from Abimelech. Abimelech is stronger than he is, and his people are stronger. So I'm not sure who we would want to win this battle, right? As you're the reader, you're kind of like, I don't know. I don't really like either side so much over here, right? Maybe we have a little bit more disdain for Abimelech given what he's capable of and what he did to Gideon's family at the beginning. So maybe we like the underdog a little bit more. We like Gaal ben Evid. We like the one who's uprising. But Gaal ben Evid and his people are not tough enough to overtake Abimelech and his army. And many, many people die at the gates of Shechem. Vayeshev Abimelech Baruma. Abimelech goes and stays in a place called Aruma. Vaygaresh Zevul et Gaal ve'et Echav mishevet b'Shechem. Zevul banishes Gaal and his brothers from living in Shechem. So basically, they're purging Shechem of all of the people who are the members of the uprising. Vahimi mahorat vayetzeh ha'am hasadeh vayagidu la'Avimelech. But now Avimelech is upset at the people of Shechem, the ones who are left over, who rebelled against him. So what happens? They tell Avimelech, the people of Shechem are leaving the city. They're going out into the fields. And Avimelech ruthlessly, in verse 43, does not let these private citizens get off the hook. He takes his army, divides them into 3 camps, and they again ambush in the field, waiting for the private citizens to come out. And they don't know they're in a battle. They're just coming out to do their chores or whatever it is that they're going to do. And they see the people coming out of the city, they pounce on them, and they kill them. Avimelech and his heads, which are with him, they dash ahead and they stand at the entrance of the city. And the other 2 columns rush on all that is in the open and strike them. So one of his columns, remember he divided them into 3 parts. One of his parts go and rush into the city. The other 2 continue to battle and kill everybody outside in the field. Abimelech fights in the city that whole day. And he conquers the city and all of the people there. And he plows the city, completely destroys it. And he salts it so that nothing can grow. I mean, you could see the ruthlessness of Abimelech and how bloodthirsty he is. He does not tolerate the potential for rebellion. He's certainly not going to tolerate any actual rebellions. He kills the private citizens. He kills the leaders. He plows the city. He salts the city so no one will come and live there. He basically makes it impossible to have anything grow over there and to live there for a very extended period of time. And basically the reader is left with what? It's in keeping a lot with the theme of Shofetim, right? It's maybe even a little worse than anything we've encountered until now. At least at certain points as we've been reading through the book, there's glimmers of hope. There's these characters that come about that can restore some sense of peace, semblance of tranquility, maybe a temporary period of time of fearing Hashem. And really at this point, it's dark, right? You're seeing Avimelech, the only remnant of this great Gideon, is just obliterating and destroying everything in his path, a bloodthirsty, reckless, maniacal individual. The people who are with him are like this. Any attempt to try and overthrow him is completely squashed. And what are we left with? We're just left with one of our great cities, Shechem, is left desolate and uninhabited. And what now? It's almost as if we don't know where we're going to go ahead and move from here. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, exactly. And it's part of it is because the enemy is from within, right? Typically, we have, like the end of last chapter was, and they went back to doing Avodah Zarah. And so, like you said, the cycle is usually Avodah Zarah, then there's an enemy, then they call out in prayer to Hashem, like you said, and that's clearly missing from this chapter. And then we get a shofet to redeem us, right? The problem here is this is unlike anything we've experienced so far in the book of Shoftim, because we're doing Avodah Zarah, but the enemy now all of a sudden is from within. The enemy is someone who should be a good guy, Abimelech. Abimelech has all of the characteristics, if he uses them for good, to be a positive individual, to be the next Shofet, right? He's from Gideon's family. If he uses his strength and his power and his ruthlessness in a positive way towards the true enemies of the Jewish people, who knows, he could have ushered in an even greater period of tranquility than his father Gidon. But because he's power hungry, because he's thirsty for authority, because he cannot tolerate anybody else partnering with him or potentially stealing from his glory, because he's perhaps very bitter about the fact that his father rejected the opportunity to be the king, and he is somebody who arrogantly feels he should be the king. All of these negative qualities have now turned him into an enemy, but it's an enemy from within. It's almost as if the Jewish people don't, what are we supposed to pray? We're supposed to pray to save us from our own people, from Abimelech, like from this enemy. Where does Avodah Zarah play a role in it? Avodah Zarah is rampant throughout the Jewish people. They almost don't even know, no one's even coming to critique them over that. Even Yotam, who critiques them, he critiques them for placing Abimelech as the king after what he did to Gidon, but even he doesn't criticize them necessarily for the Avodah Zarah. It's ironic that he uses trees, which is the main form of Avodah Zarah, as his parable even, right? So he's working within the context they understand. So it's just a very, very dark moment at this point. Abimelech has all of the qualities, should he use them for good, to be the judge, but he's essentially what I called in the title of the class, the anti-judge. He takes all of those qualities and uses them for bad. And he's the main character, an evil and wicked person. Let's skip down a little bit. Actually, no, we'll keep reading just straight through the Pesukim, maybe in English, just to speed things up a little bit. We have about 10 verses to the end of the chapter, because I want to try to get to what is Abimelech's end by the end of this chapter. So in verse 46, when all the citizens of the Tower of Shechem learned of this, they went into the tunnel of the temple of El Berit, right? So they gather in the temple of their god. Whatever people are remaining, they basically go into hiding. When Abimelech was informed that all the citizens of the Tower of Shechem had gathered there, so they basically make a last stand. Whoever's left just to gather in this tower on high ground to just try to hide out as much as they can, right? Abimelech is not about to let anybody be spared against this rebellion. So he finds out that the people gather in the Tower of Shechem, and Abimelech and all the troops he had went with him up to Har Tzalmon, up to a mountain. Taking an axe in his hand, Abimelech lopped off a tree and lifted it onto his shoulder. Then he said to the troops that accompanied him, "What you saw me do, quick, do the same." Right? So everybody's taking trees and lopping them down and getting ready to carry them. So what do all the troops do? They also cut down trees. They march behind Abimelech and they lay them against the tunnel and they set fire to them, or to the tunnel over their heads. So basically they're going to burn these people out of the tunnel, out of the tower, to get them out. Thus all of the people of the Tower of Shechem also perished, about 1,000 men and women. So he ruthlessly traps them in with fire, killing 1,000 men and women. Abimelech then goes, he's just on a spree, just on a killing spree, complete an utter annihilation of everybody is basically what he's seeking. Abimelech proceeded to then go to Tebetz. He encamped at Tebetz and occupied that city as well. So he's on a conquest. But there's a fortified tower in that city. And all the citizens of the town, men and women, took refuge there. Again, they try to do similar to what we saw the people of Shechem do. They tried to go in a tunnel. Now they're going into a tower. They shut themselves in and went up to the roof of the tower. And here's the end. And this is such an ironic end. Abimelech comes to the tower and he starts to fight and attack it. He reaches the entrance of the tower and he wants to light it on fire. One woman drops an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and cracked his skull. So he calls out to one of his lads, his arms bearer. Take out your sword and kill me. So that they shouldn't say a woman killed me. And he stabs him and he dies. The people see Abimelech died. Everybody goes home. It's almost as if it's like they've been in a trance under his rule and his mental hold. And all of a sudden they see him die, and everything just stops. They all go back to their homes. Vayashav Elohim et ra'at Avimelech asher asa le'aviv laharog et shavim ehav. God repaid Abimelech for the evil he did by killing his 70 brothers. He likewise repaid the men of Shechem for all of their wickedness. And the words of Yotam, the son of Yerubbaal, who offered the curse to them that that time ago, right, basically ended up coming true. His premonition comes to fruition. The death of Abimelech is so ironic for a number of reasons. Number one, he's killed by the lad. Remember, his father wanted to give one of his brothers to kill Zebah and Salmunah, and he said, I can't do it. Here, there's no hesitation. The Na'ad kills Abimelech right away, and he should die by the Na'ad instead of dying by a woman. And we know already that death by a woman is something that is shameful in their eyes, as it is for Abimelech here, going back to the death of Sisra when he was killed by Yael. So some of those themes are starting to repeat itself. The chapter, however, ends, and like Liz said before, we're left a little broken from the cycle. We're expecting the cycle to continue as it has so many times of repentance, of teshuvah, of Hashem, of tranquility, and we don't get any of that. We're sort of left with a pit in our stomach here at the end of chapter 9, and we'll have to continue it into chapter 10 with nothing, right? There's no repentance. There's no salvation from the enemy, really. Yes, Abimelech is gone, but we don't feel like we have succeeded in any way, shape, or form. Usually the formula at the end of the chapter is that Bnei Israel ushered in a time of peace and tranquility and prosperity. And that doesn't exist over here either. It's not going to be until a real judge comes up to be able to do that. So this is a dark chapter for us, but I think it goes to show us, I think maybe the best lesson we could take away is how unfortunate it is when good qualities that could be used for the positive are turned around to be used negatively because they're led by desire, by anger, by arrogance, by power. When all of those things come and they're abused the way they were Abimelech, there's no end to how terrible it could become. The ruthlessness knows no bounds. And that's, I guess, the lesson. Maybe this is what Gideon was worried about from the very beginning. When he rejected at the very beginning to be the king, he was worried about what would happen if people who were not worthy got placed into dictatorial positions. And the first example that the Jewish people have of something resembling a king goes terribly, terribly wrong. I think Rabbi Hatton says it best when he writes over here, the first attempt in Israel to establish some sort of dynastic rule thus fails completely. The narrative is decidedly unsympathetic to any of the protagonists mentioned in this chapter. There's nobody really that comes out smelling like a rose in this chapter, save for Yotam, the surviving son of Gideon. Maybe he is the only one who's vindicated to a certain extent that his parable comes true. But even he, where is he left? He doesn't become the king afterwards. He doesn't save the Jewish people. His words just come true, but that's about it. Nobody really comes out in a positive light in this chapter. Abimelech, of course, represents the pitfalls associated with hereditary rule. For while this system may accomplish the transition of power more smoothly than typically transpires with other forms of government, often the one who assumes that power is unfit to wield it. Abimelech has no redeeming qualities of his own and was only appointed king because of his father's merit and his own unbridled avidity. Though Abimelech may have been a gifted fighter and strategist, he used those talents only to his own advantage and not for the benefit of the people. So he has some of those qualities that Gideon has, but he doesn't care about the people as much. He just cares about himself. Abimelech is the only judge in the book, if you want to even call him that, who is not engaged whatsoever in the typical pursuits associated with being a biblical judge. He does not exhort or instruct like Devorah. Remember we talked about the different things that judges do. They either actually judge the people, deal with their inner workings, like Devorah does. Eshet Lapidot, she's under the tree handling cases, making peace between people. Abimelech doesn't do any of that. Nor does he rescue from oppression like Otniel, Ehud, and Gideon. He's not saving them from oppression. Quite the opposite. He brings the oppression. No wonder that after his dismal end, the notion of monarchy was effectively shelved by the people of Israel for almost 2 centuries. After Abimelech, nobody brings up the idea of having a king for 200 more years. That's how bad and ruthless it was under Abimelech that they say, okay, that experiment failed miserably. we're not interested in bringing it back up again until 200 years later. As for the son of Eved, and as for Gaal, the son of Eved and Zevul, they too are rogues of the first order. The former, an inebriated malcontent, espousing no palliative reforms to counter Abimelech. What does Gaal ben Eved offer, right? We think of Gaal ben Eved for a moment as he could be the one to help us out. But what does he really do? He doesn't do anything. He's not somebody who's a heroic character. He's not trying to bring in moral and ethical reform. He's just somebody who says, why should we listen to this guy? Listen to me. And he's going to just basically supplant Abimelech and maybe even bring in an even more ruthless rule. Even the oppressed governors and people of Shechem, idol worshippers, all who were initially only too willing to support Abimelech's murderous bid for the throne, elicit no pity from the reader. You don't feel bad for the people of Shechem who end up getting killed. They were the ones who first crowned Abimelech as the king. Then they try to rebel against him. But they're not exactly people who we say are, oh my goodness, I feel so bad for them, right? There isn't that much pity for them. Yes, they die in the end, which is terrible. It's tragic, but it's kind of self-inflicted. They chose Abimelech in the first place. Then they chose to rebel against him. They don't convert from their idolatry. So what do they deserve, really, right? As a whole, this chapter serves as severe caution, providing us with a profile of an anti-ruler who must not be empowered even when the people are justifiably desperate for leadership. The anti-ruler candidate possesses a lust for power that should immediately be regarded with suspicion and alarm. He is often inspired with a healthy dose of paranoia and thinks nothing of brutally extirpating any and all who oppose him. It's almost as if Abimelech is a classical, French king during the French Revolution. Like that's the type of king. Like he's a Louis XIV type person, right? That's the type of king you get in his mind. Though he possesses cunning, charisma, and capability, he has absolutely no sense of a higher purpose and no regard for the larger good. He acts for his own advantage and views the world through the narrow prism of greed and self-gain. In short, the chapter indicates no judge at all is preferable to the anti-judge, for though the latter appears to alleviate social and political chaos, in short, the chapter says no judge at all is preferable to the anti-judge, for though the latter appears to alleviate social and political chaos in the short term, his narcissistic policies tend to propagate it in the long term. Without fail, the anti-judge in the end destroys himself. And that's the interesting thing, right? Who kills him? He basically kills himself, Abimelech. He can't take it that someone else killed him. He kills himself. And that's sort of a metaphor for what happens to people who have this way. They basically self-inflict their own death because of how self-centered and narcissistic they actually are. So there's nothing really good about this chapter. We're kind of left with a pit, unfortunate, but it does give us a word of caution about what happens when power is given to people who are not deserving of it, the ills of what monarchy could potentially lead to, and how we have to now try to pick ourselves up out of the depths over here in this chapter by bringing in some better judges, and hopefully we can try and rebound in the chapters to come. So this is chapter 9, Abimelech, the anti-judge. We hope to see brighter and better days ahead as we continue through the book of Shofetim. We will get some positive, but we'll also get some back to be negative as well. So that's the end of today's shiur. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next week as we try to rebound from the colossal efforts of problems of Avimelech. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.